Hi everyone, this is a video edition of the Scattered podcast. I'm Yvonne Chorlin. I'm a physical or biological anthropologist and archaeologist, and this is a short video of my contribution to the Alberta portion of a cross-Canada scavenging project led by Dr. Sherry Forbes. To learn more about Sherry and the origin of this project, listen to episode 16 of the audio portion of this podcast. In a nutshell, law enforcement need to recover as much potential forensic evidence as possible to help solve cases. They approach Sherry with two questions. Where do we search for this evidence and how far do we search for it? To help answer these questions, Sherry wants to identify the scavengers and their scavenger behavior to figure out who may have influenced the movement of this evidence, and then also to map the dispersal of the evidence so we know where it went. By identifying the scavengers and their scavenger behavior and mapping the dispersal of the evidence, we hope to see patterns and be able to answer the two questions of where and how far to search for the remains so that we can answer this for law enforcement. So having these ideas and these questions is all fine and dandy, but how do you do this? How do you identify the scavengers and map the dispersal of the remains? Well, that's where this video comes in. I'm going to show you. This is one of the locations of our Edmonton dump site near the city of Edmonton's landfill. All of our pigs weigh between 150 to 250 pounds, and all of them are dressed in human clothing to simulate a real situation. A cable is tied around each carcass, and the other end is tied around a tree to help keep the carcass between the cameras. The cable does not impede scavenger activity. While the pig was being set up and Sherry was setting up the cameras, I took notes and photographs of the pig and the surrounding area, and I made a sketch map of any topographical features including fence lines, buildings, and roads. We also had a drone available from the Edmonton City Police, which we used to take aerial photos. Then we set the cameras and we left and waited for the scavengers to show up. It took about a week before we started to see the first animals: rabbit, coyote, birds. However, coyotes and multiple coyotes at night seem to be our main scavenger. Here you can see how multiple coyotes are making quick work of the carcass and also moving the remains away from the original deposition point. On October 4th, 2021, about 2 months after we initially placed the pig, we returned and did a preliminary search. What we did at the Edmonton dump site, both the forested and the open locations, was a little bit different than what we did at other sites. We did our preliminary search a month early so that we could accommodate schedules and bring out a search and rescue volunteer team to help us search. Different units of the Edmonton City Police also came out so that they could practice their search management techniques. The volunteer search team performed a hands and knees search of both the forested and open locations. They flagged anything they found. Then, members of Edmonton Police Ident Unit marked and photographed anything the flags indicated. At the original deposition point, we could see body staining and dead vegetation. This site had a lot less leaf litter compared to the forested site. However, a lot of the skeletal remains still had a lot of flesh on them. When I made my sketch map, I could see that the remains were dispersed randomly around the original deposition point, and remains were dispersed along game trails. Whether or not these game trails were created during the dispersal event or pre-existing, we don't know. On these aerial photos, you can see the random pattern around the original deposition point. Then we left the site to overwinter and we returned the next year. So this is the Edmonton open site, and you can see that there's no canopy. But you can see that this is very lush and overgrown in here. I've done a bit of trampling so you can see kind of in relation to where the flags are. We had a pig just in here, and so it's going to be fun trying to find that original deposition point and the other flags. The other site, that the forested site, is just to the south, kind of in that direction, about 80 meters or so. Edmonton is to the east, that way is north, that way is Edmonton's to the west, that way is east. Okay, so original deposition point, we've got an egress up here. The North Saskatchewan is right there. We're on a bit of a dip, and it goes up, and then just a couple of meters, there's the embankment, which is a good meter or two high into the North Saskatchewan River right there. So the 3-foot high grass has been cleared by me by hand, just to see what I could see. Here's the original deposition point in here, and found mandible, ribs, vertebrae, some skull fragments, other fragments all around in here. And then, so that's north, west, south. Some remains down in there. There's our egress right in there. And then we had some dispersion in here. I was finding remains in here still. I didn't find anything in there. Yeah, this is just me today looking over this. So yeah, one person doing all this is hard work, and it'd be hard searching in here anyway, even if you had a few more people. You might be getting in each other's way. But and then we did have dispersal out into the pines that way through little game trails. It was fun crawling in there, literally crawling in there last October to search in there. And even when the search team went in, they went in this side. They didn't finish and come back this side, but they went in this side, and they were just pooped. It was mad searching. So I'll do what I can, and I'll see what I find. When I did an inventory on the remains we recovered about 1 year after we deposited the pig, I found that we had recovered about 25% of the skeleton. When I looked at what types of bones made up the remains we recovered, I saw it was mostly vertebrae and ribs. I also wanted to know if the longer we left out the carcass and the remains, the fewer remains we would recover. And it looks like that's exactly what happened. The longer the carcass was out, the less we recovered. So what do we know so far? At this site, our main scavengers were coyotes and magpies. We captured other animals on camera too, but the main scavengers were coyotes and magpies. Scavenging activity started at this site almost immediately and continued through September. Remains were randomly dispersed around the original deposition point and also along game trails. Whether or not these game trails were pre-existing or created during the dispersal event, we don't know. We recovered about 25% of the skeleton, and most of what we recovered were vertebrae and ribs. So what have we learned overall across all of our sites? We learned that our main scavengers are coyotes, bears, and birds, as we saw here. Game trails can be created or used by scavengers to access the carcass and disperse the remains. Between the preliminary search and the final search, there was a difference. Initially, we discovered 20 to 50% of the remains within about 3 months of the carcass placement, and then that went down at about a year when we discovered only 2 to 53%. The majority of the remains were discovered within a 100-meter radius of the original deposition point, and the majority of the bones that we recovered were either vertebrae or ribs. This video would not have been possible without the study led by Dr. Sherry Forbes. The Calgary and Edmonton Police Services were instrumental in helping us find land to use and to coordinate the searches and carcasses, and of course, to let us know if this information is useful to them. Many big, huge, massive thanks to the landowners and pig growers. We couldn't have done this research without you. To find out more about this study and the topic of scattered and scavenged remains, tune into my podcast, Scattered, One Person's Search for the Story Behind Scattered Remains, available on your favorite podcast platform. Also, check out other videos in this series about this study, available on my website, yvonnechorlin.com, and read about it on my blog and Facebook, The Reluctant Archaeologist.